So what do you think of when you think of the coast in Bombay? This is what I used to think of until a few years ago. You think of people having fun, taking some selfies or photos, think a little bit of fishing on the shore, and of course, just people either spending time there or something big happening there, like the high rises you see in the bottom right. And the past few years, it's also come to be synonymous with big infrastructure projects. There's the sea link that you see on the right hand side, and on the left hand side is the coastal road. And this has been a sort of a developing boundary of the city that's being pushed further and further over the years into the sea. But there's also one side of the city shores, that not a lot of people know about. What you see on the left hand side is a colony of zoanthus, button polyps, they are commonly called, which you see right at the edge of the city. In a close up, they look something like this. And even corals, like these hard corals that we found at Marine Drive in South Bombay. Just step off the road and you see them right down there. And there's this whole landscape that reveals itself at low tide, which is called the intertidal zone, which I'm sure most of you attending are familiar with the term. And it's completely hidden from sight when the tide is high. But when the tide goes low, even in a city like Mumbai, which is super urban, super polluted, you find a landscape like this. And my presentation is about marine life of Mumbai, which was a citizen driven exploration that started very organically and just out of fascination more than anything else. And I'll tell you a little about the journey, about how it's been. Intertidal biodiversity documentation in general has been very slow compared to other forms of wildlife in India. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. Firstly, there are very little known taxa, like most marine taxa, which Biju sir hinted at when he did the introduction to this session. And even though Biju sir mentioned that whatever is known of marine life in terms of taxonomy, especially, is skewed towards the shallows. But interestingly, the intertidal is a very, very accessible zone. Anyone can literally walk onto it. But yet, there is a huge data gap right there. Secondly, these are vast areas. It sounds like it's just a narrow strip of land. When you look at it on the map, it looks like that. But when you actually go to explore it, some of the intertidal areas in this country are huge. Like the water recedes kilometers, and there is those are largely unexplored areas, and there are several such sites scattered all along the coastline. Observations are limited by the tide windows. As you all know, it's a place that's only exposed at low tide. A lot of biodiversity rich intertidal zones are exposed on very specific low tides when the water goes very far out, which are few and far apart in the year. So there is that constraint. And lastly, as compared to terrestrial wildlife, there is a real shortage of serious enthusiasts. For example, if you think of birds or even large mammals for that matter, you easily get clues from people who are enthusiasts who are just roaming around. When there's something that's worthy of study, worthy of research, you'll get a hint from someone who saw it and posted a photo on Facebook, for example, and you'll see that this is something worth investigating. In in the intertidal space or marine life for that matter, we are going in quite blind because we have very few such cues coming in. Especially if you look at in the major spaces of social media, for example, there's not much of a hint of it. But all of these, although they are hurdles, they make it a very interesting proposition for citizen science in this space, which is how marine life of Mumbai came together. It was just a few of us. The man in the neon T-shirt is Pradeep Patade, who co-founded the Marine Life of Mumbai project with us. And he had been roaming the seashores of Mumbai for at least 15 to 20 years before we started this. He was intimately familiar with a lot of the biodiversity found on our shores. I was going in completely blind. I had never set foot on the intertidal zone in Mumbai until 3 or 4 years ago, very recently. And so we just started taking walks. we just got together and we just decided that more people need to know about it, and not just that, but we need to know about it ourselves a lot better. And that sprung just from a fascination for the marine life that can live in an urban environment such as this. So we got together and we just announced a walk on social media. We just told everyone on social media that we're doing this walk just to explore. If you want to join us, join us. And on that first walk, some 40 odd people signed up and they came for that walk. It was just a free walk conducted very loosely just to explore one of the very popular seashores in South Bombay. And um, over time, then we also started doing a little bit of online outreach. We started a website, which was again started by Shaunak Modi, who is one of our team members who came in with just enthusiasm and curiosity more than anything else. And we set up this simple website where we had shore walk guidelines like this on how to instructing people on how to safely explore seashores on their own. And we created these seashore guides, which are very simple brochure like things. They're available in PDF on the website even now. And the art in those again was contributed by different artists who were there in our team. Again, just out of interest and nothing else. And we also took to social media, of course, because we felt that people need a sort of a primer to this. It's not something that people will easily catch on to, like birding, for example, which is already quite popular now. It's easy to get people into birding. Something like this, you would need a bit of a hook. So we had social media people and people who specialize in outreach on our team. And we set up these social media handles like you see, where we introduce people little by little to the species that we find on our shore. And if you look at these are a little outdated, sorry, the screenshots, but if you look at the Instagram page on the left, during the lockdown, when we couldn't conduct the walks last year, one of our teammates, Sejal Mehta, actually designed these virtual shore walks that you see right on the left. And those were sort of like taking people through a virtual tour of each of these seashores using photos that we had in our archives from the previous years. So social media has been a very important tool for us, ultimately feeding into the citizen science and data collection itself, because you need to familiarize people with that before you before you ask them to collect data. So we started seeing a few species at the start, then a little more and a little more and a little more. And it kept building up in that way. About 1 year into the project, we started in, I think 2017 March is when we started. And about 1 year into the project, we realized that we're seeing so much that we need to really systematically document it, because it wasn't there in the academic papers, not much was there in reports. There was some in scientific publication, but it was all scattered and not very accessible to the general public. And at the same time, we saw that a lot of the projects coming up had these environment impact assessment reports, which had a lot of data missing on species that we could see very easily. We could just step onto the shore and see species, and they were completely missing from these reports. So we decided that maybe starting to systematically document it, little by little, not a full-fledged documentation effort at the start, but just noting things down would be helpful, is what we thought. And that's when we started using this database website called iNaturalist. Some of you may have heard of it already. But why particularly iNaturalist? Well, you can visit the website to see why, but I'll cover a few points here. Firstly, it's a very simple interface for everyone using it, whether it's observers who are just people who upload, identifiers who are people who really examine the observations, and site visitors who may want to either just know about things or want to download the data for their own use, for their own research, or educational use or whatever. Secondly, iNaturalist has a peer-reviewed identification system where you can upload something and add an ID, but there are people, the users on INAT can then either disagree or agree with that ID. So there's a lot of back and forth that happens. And this is something we found particularly useful for documenting biodiversity that was very poorly studied, like I said in the start. There's a lot of uncertainty about the names of many of these organisms. Even the ones that are documented in papers, there's a lot of uncertainty about whether they should be changed by now, or like some of them are outdated. So all of that is much easier to do on a platform where there is this continuous back and forth and continuous improvement of identification. Thirdly, it's easy to set up projects on INAT. The Marine Life of Mumbai is one example of a project on that website. It's basically like a group, like making a Facebook group. And you can segregate it from the rest of the observations by region, or you can select specific taxa that will go into that project, and so on. And lastly, INAT is just fun to use for casual first timers. It comes with an Android or iPhone app as well, and it's as simple as just wandering and taking a picture and uploading it with your GPS on. It's as simple as that. And INAT also has these little reward systems like observation of the week, observation of the month, things like that, which makes it sort of fun to use. They also have this app called Seek, which I haven't included it here, SEEK, which is more of a sort of a gamified version of INAT. It feeds into INAT, but it's more like you point at things and you get the ID, kind of like what Pokemon Go used to be like, something like that. So this is a screenshot of the MLOM project as of today. MLOM has been around for 4 years. The INAT project has been around for roughly 3 years. And in that time, we've had around 67 people contributing, and you can see the figures here, 458 species and a little above 4,000 observations now. All of it from within Mumbai's urban seashores, which is actually a lot more than what we would have imagined when we started MLOM. We would never have imagined there would be so many species. And although it started organically, we didn't really have aims of wanting to document at a certain rate or have a certain number of documented observations or anything. It just happened organically. But in any case, I have put in a graph here to show you what the trajectory looked like. So yeah, it's been a steady rise. There's been a few plateaus in between. Most of those plateaus are around the monsoon period when we can't really go out on seashore walks. Interestingly, 2020 did not have so much of a plateau because we saw people who were stuck in their houses going back to their old observations and uploading a lot. We saw quite a surge, in fact, in 2020 from one person in Mumbai who uploaded almost some 10,000 observations to INAT in 1 month from his old years of photos. Many of them went into our project as well. So yeah, so that's been happening. The project membership has also steadily been increasing over this period. And we've now covered all of these seashores in Mumbai. There's this eastern part of the seaboard, which is mostly restricted area, which is why it's not so well covered. But otherwise, we've explored most of the known seashores, and we plan to explore even more. There are a lot of species that I could talk about, but I've just selected a few in the next couple of slides. One of them are this group that's called lost species by taxonomists. Lost species are basically species that were documented from a particular area and then haven't been seen for a long, long time. One of the most sensational examples of this, which just exploded on the local newspapers and everything when we saw it, is this slug in the middle called Goniobranchus bombayanus. This was described in 1946 by a British biologist, and it was described from Mumbai. And after 1946, there have been no records of it at all from this region. And we saw this on one of our public seashore walks quite by chance, literally just stumbled on it in a tide pool. And that was an observation of value to people who study sea slugs, and especially to taxonomists around here who had been looking for this for a long time. And there are many such examples like the ones you see here. There are also a lot of protected species that decision makers are unaware of, or at least seem to be unaware of their presence in the intertidal. Dr. Raghavan in his presentation talked with quite a bit of nuance about the nitty-gritty of including species in the protected species list, and cross-referencing that with IUCN assessments and so on. That which was a very interesting insight into that part of it. But just for representation, I've included a few corals here, which are protected species. These are just 4 species. There are even more found in Mumbai's intertidal, and these are species that sometimes many of these species don't feature in reports that come up here, or if they do feature, they are sort of hushed up to get infrastructure projects passed. So this is another thing that we found. There is a lot of fishing that happens in the intertidal. Of course, these are livelihoods, so they need to be safeguarded. But I included this slide more to say that a lot of our data also comes from here. We go to the seashore, we meet a lot of these fishers who fish for various different kinds of taxa in the intertidal zone. And they have a lot of this non-codified knowledge that Naveen spoke about in his presentation, which is rejected by a lot of scientists, but there is definitely a lot of scope to bring that in somehow into mainstream documentation. And that's basically why I wanted to include this slide. A lot of our species documentation and things like seasonality in the intertidal, the seasonal changes in the ecology of the intertidal, a lot of those come from fishers who work in the intertidal. So about data access and use, it has been essentially open-ended. Like I said, it started just as a like we were just fascinated with the seashore life, and that's the sort of narrative we've always been using with people. We haven't been saying this is like documentation is our goal or something. It's more like we just want to get people connected to this part of the city that they've forgotten. But there's been a byproduct, a very, very important byproduct of that, which is the documentation. So it's essentially open-ended. iNaturalist is completely open access. You can download the data and of course make sure you credit the people that the data actually belongs to, but it's essentially open access. It has served as a simple reference guide for us and for others because there are no good guidebooks about the intertidal. I feel it's really hard to even make a guidebook about the intertidal that will stay up to date for a long time. So something like INAT is ideal for that. You can just look up a location that you want to go to and see what species have been recorded there. So you have like a regularly refreshed reference guide. A lot of the images that we put up on INAT have been used as resources by other third parties for outreach and education. There are local college students who have accessed and downloaded the data for use in their dissertations and so on. And the most important, well, not the most important, but a very important use of this data has been to plug biodiversity data gaps, which I spoke about before. But an example that I wanted to highlight was with the coastal road, which happened, there was a court case in 2019 in the Bombay High Court, where the petitioners used our data as a sort of secondary data source to then make their own reports on the particular cases they were fighting. There were many isolated cases with the coastal road. And so they made these reports, and these were actually accepted in the High Court, and the High Court issued a stay on the coastal road at that time. That stay was later overturned, but it worked when it was supposed to work. So that's been encouraging for us. And over time, members of our team moved to different parts. It's been a very fluid team, a very diverse team. And the vast majority of the people in the team have been non-biologists. And they've been people who, jumped in, done their bit, and then left for their own work. So they've sort of spread out over the country. And all of these different projects that you see on your screen were sort of offshoots that happened wherever those people went and settled. There's one project for the East Coast now. There was one that I started when I moved to Goa called Seashore Life of Goa. There are projects in the Andamans like this one, which is taxon specific, you see, intertidal corals of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And we have this one parent project that we recently made, which is sort of an umbrella for all of these intertidal projects to sit into. So I presume most of you are from Kerala. So if you explore the intertidal, then intertidal biodiversity of India is one project that you might want to contribute to. So for further aims, over time, we've realized that this is a model that can be refined and put to more specific use as well. So that's what one of the things we aim to do. We want to extend the geographic range of this effort by way of exploring the seashores a little outside Bombay as well and documenting those, and also facilitating groups that want to start something like this in their own regions, like I showed you on the previous slide. We want to look into pursuing more specific ecological questions using this data, which so far has been sort of loose and it's like broad scale data at the moment, but with a bit of refining, it can be used to answer more specific questions. And lastly, we want to do a bit to take tide pooling, which is what this activity is called, towards the ranks of birding and herping. That is a very, very ambitious aim, I would say, but it's been very encouraging to see that it's not all that difficult to get people interested in the intertidal. We've had like a whole random set of people joining us in Mumbai for our walks and then also submitting data. So that's something that we hope to do.